This is Swapnil Bhartiya with Rob Hirschfeld. This is our limited series on scaling infrastructure as code. And in this final episode, we're going to talk about collaboration. We started this series with talking about teams not working together. And in previous discussion, we talked about the importance of collaboration. Talk about collaboration from the perspective of infrastructure as code.
Collaboration is one of the things that is so critical in building systems, and I think we overlook it because we get very focused on what job we need to do. And when we think about collaboration here, it's not just can I build systems and can I hand them off to the next person downstream. I think of that as coordination. So where you're actually helping people in a sequence work together. And that's a critically important part of infrastructure as code too. But if you go a level deeper, then we start thinking about things the way developers think about them, which is when I have a library, can I reuse that library? Can I pull something in from open source or from a community or a vendor and then reuse that code? There's actually a very deep collaboration component in building systems like that. And so when we think about infrastructure as code collaboration, the question that we like to ask is, if you're doing work, can another person in another team at your company use the same work, reuse the module? If they improve or find a bug, can you take advantage of what they found? Can you incorporate that change back into your work? That's collaboration. It ultimately is being able to work with other people, other teams, ideally even other companies across the industry. And that's really where we see the power of infrastructure as code collaboration, where RackN can write infrastructure as code libraries and have them used across our customer base without modification, or in ways that the modification doesn't make it so that you can't take the next update and patch. That's something that's normal for developers, but hasn't been true for people writing automation. And infrastructure as code really can change that whole dynamic.
So if this is like dev code like collaboration, what aspect of development do you think are often overlooked?
Wow, this is really important because I do think when we look at infrastructure as code, we're ultimately talking about automation and operations that feel much more like developers. So that's a good point. The thing that really stands out to me with what our experience is in RackN and RackN's customers is the degree of decomposition and modularity that they experience in building automation is incredibly high. And what we've seen is that when we take big things like an infrastructure pipeline and break it down into workflows, and workflows break into stages, and stages break into tasks, that there's an element where people are like, there's a lot of moving parts. But at the same time, very quickly, they start reusing the subcomponents of the system. And so they realize that decomposition of a big piece of work into smaller modular units means that they can literally assemble together the work that needs to get done out of smaller pieces. And that means that they have to be able to plug together. That's that modularity component. And so as we want to treat automation more like a development construct, having that idea, that simple concept of decomposing into smaller units and then allowing things to be modular and snap together is absolutely essential. The fun thing is it makes it a very development-like experience where you can actually do that type of very quick prototyping. You can bring in a new library and make something work. Even if you then later have to extend and modify it, you get that sort of, it works out of the box experience that you get from having a very decomposed modular system. And it's amazingly powerful.
Let's talk about modularity. Is it really about collaboration?
Oh my goodness, yes. This is one of those places where when we look at how do you improve collaboration in automation, right? This is something that's been on RackN's core mission from the very beginning. Trying to make sure that when we build something, it can be used across our customer base, even if it's very detailed automation. If you can't build it in a modular way, then it forces everybody to create a fork of it or change it. And as soon as you start having pieces that can't be reused in a modular way, you're literally forcing everybody to make their own copy and then tweak it. Once somebody's made a copy of something and changed it, and they can't easily feed it back into the system, and the whole reuse breaks down. So this is part of sort of how we think about the system. It's not just modularity for modularity's sake. It's actually modularity to drive collaboration so that we can ensure that people aren't making sort of these bespoke custom forks of the automation code that we've seen a lot of, say in Ansible or Terraform plans. By avoiding that, we actually encourage a much higher degree of reuse and collaboration.
Now, when we do talk about collaboration, it could mean so many different things. Here, are we talking about collaboration within the organization or also outside of it?
It's a really important point because when we see organizations, a lot of the challenges that companies are facing right now is that they're not actually collaborating well internally. And we see this rise of platform teams as a way to sort of get control back in automation and reuse. So without a doubt, the collaboration that we're trying to foster is this internal collaboration so that different development teams can start reusing the same automation, and a platform team or an operations or an SRE team can actually do work that is across different teams and different silos and have reusable code. That's absolutely essential when we talk about collaboration, and that has to start somewhere. For us, that actually meant that we have to come back all the way and say, well, if we're going to have that type of collaboration inside of a customer base, then we have to be able to have reusable code across our customer base also. So what I think is that you don't get to have one without the other. You have to have a system that's designed for collaboration. It is worth noting, though, that you do have to be able to distinguish between community development, things that are actually designed to be shared widely across different customers, and internal collaboration that can have much more built to suit or custom components to it. And one of the things that we've done very carefully is enable both to coexist. So you don't have to choose this is an internal project or this is a community project. You can actually do work in one or the other and have them then come back together side by side. And that's been incredibly powerful because it means that if somebody's doing work that could be shared more broadly, there's a high incentive to contribute that back into the community and eliminate toil for everybody. If there's something that is really specific to how one company is running and what they need, then they can isolate that. And then having the two coexist without any friction is critical to being able to collaborate.
When we talk about collaboration, we often start talking about open source as well.
Yeah.
Is it related?
I think that a lot of the things that people have learned about open source, how you make things work across different teams, different companies, different organizations, is absolutely critical to this type of infrastructure as code system. So be getting used to doing peer reviews and Git check-ins and gates, shared code repositories, all of those practices in open source are fundamentally critical. The one thing that's different with operational code, I think that's been really hard, is that to make this work, you have to make sure that any changes you make to an automation system, to an infrastructure as code library, can be used widely across the industry. And that's one of the places where open source doesn't always work. And it's helpful to have a vendor like RackN involved because our goal here is to have a high degree of reuse across all of our customer base, right? That's eliminating toil, it's providing value. And so when somebody's doing work that improves their own operations and wants to give it back into the community, we don't want to have that person, the author of that improvement, that automation, then responsible for does it work at my competitor's site or a completely different use case. And in open source, that can cause a lot of friction. So if somebody who's asking you to fix something or change something that you are relying on, you're going to take operational risk or time to fix it, or you're going to have to. And if you don't, then the community is going to break down. In this case, what RackN has done is we've actually taken on the role of curating a lot of this community content so that people can be assured that as they work on things that are in the community, if they offer back an improvement, we are then going to make sure that that improvement, they don't take on a burden by passing improvements back into the community. And so there is a balance here where open source is really important, but you don't want to pass a burden backwards on the author.
You folks are doing a lot of work in this space, but can you also talk about how can we foster shared development for infrastructure as code?
So This has been really exciting for us to see from a development perspective, is that our customers have actually built dev test production systems to work through infrastructure as code. So when you're building infrastructure as code, a big part of doing it is that you can actually lift up that automation, that you can version it, and that you can pass it through a Git controlled gate and validate it, which means that as you're building collaborative automation, you can test it, you can build it on your systems, but you can then pass it into another developer or a test system and have it run as part of a validation process. That completely changes, just like with development, having a good CI/CD pipeline, having the types of gates and checks and the ability to exactly replicate environments is transformative to the ability to collaborate and work together. And we've seen this as incredibly powerful within our customers. It's become so easy to set up a dev test prod or a prod to stage environment that our customers have really changed their process for building automation together. And the confidence that they have in doing those rollouts has really been transformative. In the same way that CI/CD systems have transformed how developers ship to code. It really improves the life cycle by allowing people to coordinate and work and verify their systems in a much more productive way.
Sometimes you have your own needs, you want to customize things based on that. So how does automation handle that?
Yeah, one of the things that RackN has really worked to address in how infrastructure as code works and why there's a platform component to building infrastructure as code is that any individual code module needs to be able to move state. And people really overlook the necessity to build a module that can read in critical state information and can send out or modify critical state information. And so when we look at infrastructure as code from an individual perspective, so I'm writing infrastructure as code as part of a bigger community or as part of a bigger system, the reason that can work is because you have a way to pull in state that you need and send out state. And by formalizing that with a platform, it's really been an important aspect to how things work. And if that sounds sort of complex, it is part of what we've seen to make this work is there is a degree of complexity in infrastructure and operating systems. And instead of trying to pretend like there isn't, right, and eliminate a whole bunch of things, there is a degree of having to say, the systems I'm integrating with are complex. To build modularity, I have to have safeguards or I have to be able to protect my module in a way that makes it really work well. And so from that perspective, we do acknowledge that building collaborative infrastructure as code means that you have to have a bigger perspective. You have to have a recognition that the next person to use this code might not have exactly the same systems that you do, might use a different version of Linux or might switch to Windows or Mac OS, and have to have the resilience in the system. That doesn't mean you have to build that every single time, but the platform that you're using and the way you build it is going to have elements of control to accommodate that type of complexity behind the scenes, and in some cases exposed in your code. It's just like writing development, where if you're writing a shared library, you're going to have to accommodate use cases and plug into a broader system to make all that stuff work. And in this case, infrastructure as code has to have the same outlook. If you just write to what your one use case in a very narrowly defined system, then your code won't be reusable by other people. And then its collaboration is going to break down. And fundamentally, what we're trying to do is save everybody a lot of time by having more modules, more components that you can use right out of the box. And so that's going to require a bit of a platform thinking mindset.
What are the impact of collaboration on day two? And once again, from the perspective or context of infrastructure as code.
We see day two as a recurring theme, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. Fundamentally, we should build systems as if we will not be the person maintaining them. Right? Day two might be, I'm operating my system and I have to keep it up or expand or change my cluster. But the thing to think about with infrastructure as code and collaboration isn't just, can I work with my team or can I work across teams in my organization or can I take advantage of this huge library of modules that RackN has built? Those are all important parts of collaboration. But it really is building for a future you or a future team. And the thing that you have to consider here isn't just that you're working to collaborate with the people immediately in proximity to you. It's actually, how do you collaborate with your future self or your future team, or your somebody who's not even not even on the job yet. That's really a lot about what we need to think about as we think about collaboration. And identify what we can do from an infrastructure as code to build the documentation and reuse and modularity. All of these pieces fundamentally are future proofing. And I think that we really underestimate the value of building a system that is resilient into the future and how much more powerful that can make the whole infrastructure as code system. And that really quickly adds up. That's a forward multiplier in value that really can't be overlooked. And we have to include that sort of day two thinking in everything we do, even as we build systems for the first time, or as we're in the moment trying to just make something work.